This is Delhi. Please stand by for the next broadcast. This is All India Radio. In the National Programme of Features, tonight we bring you a feature titled Gandhi's Track to Swaraj. The radio programme aims to unfold the history of railways in India and the untold tales of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi on the railroads.
April 1853. History was made when the first passenger train, operated by 3 locomotives called Sahib, Sultan and Sindh, carrying 13 carriages, chugged out from Bori Bandar towards Thane to cover a distance of 21 miles, marked by a 21-gun salute. Since that day, reams have been written on what a great beneficial network the British gave to our country before bidding adieu to it on the 15th of August, 1947. While the railways have since garnered immense appreciation for the role they have played in the country's economy, the truth, according to historians, lies in the fact that the British had established this immense passenger network for their own imperialistic needs. Back in England then, railway companies were making huge profits, and a lot of businessmen had cast an eye on the Indian subcontinent with the possibility of making money using the railways. So the stage was set. Let's hear what Dr. Arup Chatterjee, professor and author of several books on the railways, has to say about how and why the railways were set up in the first place.
It is relatively less known that somewhere near Chennai, in a small village called Chintadripet, we have the foundations of the first railway track in India. This was not a passenger railway. It was known as the Red Hill Railroad. And this was followed by a major battle between 2 eminent personalities in India's railway history. The first one was John Chapman of the Great Indian Peninsular Railway Company. And the second one was Roland MacDonald Stevenson, a very prominent name for the East India Railway Company. Roland MacDonald Stevenson was a collaborator, a partner with the grandfather of Rabindranath Tagore, that is Dwarkanath Tagore, who was a major industrialist and also somebody who wanted India to have its railroads as soon as possible. Now, Dwarkanath Tagore had actually purchased collieries in North Bengal in Raniganj, and he wanted the passage of coal from there to Calcutta to be facilitated and from Calcutta to New Delhi. And he couldn't live long enough to see his dream fulfilled because he dies in 1845. And Roland MacDonald Stevenson purchases his company, that is the Great Western of Bengal, and merges that into the East India Railway Company. The EIRC was on track to float the first passenger train in India, but John Chapman won the race because in April 1853, they were the first who ran that famous passenger train from Bombay to Thane.
The first few years were not easy for the railways, and the East India Company met several challenges.
Since 1856, there had been rebellions in India. There was the Santhal rebellion in eastern India, and that was followed by the mutiny in several parts of northern India. And the railways incurred damages of about 3 billion sterling pounds in that day and age. And after the 1860s begins the real history, or the administrative history, I should say, of the Indian railways. The primary purposes of building a railways in India were as follows. Number one, the British wanted to facilitate the transplantation of tea into India because in 1840s, Robert Fortune had discovered tea saplings in China and he was successfully able to smuggle them to Hong Kong and India. tea plantations or tea samples had been discovered in Assam as early as the 1820s with the help of Moniram Devan. Tea was a very important factor in the history of the Indian railways. The other factors were, of course, other kinds of harvests and crops, cotton being a primary such example, because after the American Civil War, Britain felt as if it would be better if it could cultivate a new market for cotton, where they could purchase cotton and supply finished goods. And India was that marketplace. And subsequently, the British also realized the need to have a faster communication of their militia and their troops and military equipment. And that is why they needed the railways all the more, which is why the railway bridge constructions that we witnessed in the 1870s and 1880s have an armorial structure to them. They look like bastions. For example, the railway station at Lucknow and the Howrah station and also Victoria Terminus, they look at the same time sublime and yet ferocious in certain ways. So there's plenty of storage. There are reserves for barricading troops, and particularly the bridges were given special features through which the military could discharge fire onto resistant or rebellious forces.
In the 169 years since they have been set up, the railways have come to occupy a special place in everyone's lives. But it would not be wrong to say that they played a prominent role in the life of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the father of the nation. It was on the advice of his political mentor, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, that Gandhi decided to travel across India and get a better understanding of the country, since he had spent most of his adult life abroad. Gandhi consequently made extensive use of the railway network, not just then, but also later, meeting people and other leaders and mobilizing crowds to become part of his Swaraj movement. Listening to this, many people might be led into believing that Gandhi had a great affection for the railways. Alas, that was not really the case. The reasons, feel historians, are varied, starting with the fact that Gandhi was among those who thought that the railways were a larger-than-life symbol of British imperialism. Or was it because the railways in India were a constant reminder of that evening in South Africa when he, a young, rich lawyer, was asked to get off the first-class compartment at the Maritzburg, now called Peter Maritzburg station, despite holding a valid first-class ticket? Dr. Varsha Das, a Gandhian and former director of the National Gandhi Museum, who has had the honor of being blessed personally by Bapu, tells us what impact the Maritzburg station incident had on him.
I would like to quote from his autobiography, where he says, "I thought about my duty. Either I should fight for my rights or go back, or else tolerate humiliations and reach Pretoria and return to the homeland after finishing the case. The pain that I had experienced is actually on the surface. It was a symptom of a more serious disease deep inside. That great disease is apartheid. If I have the strength to cure the deep-seated disease, then I should use it. I should endure all the pain that would be inflicted upon me while doing so, and I must oppose only to eradicate apartheid. And I decided to go ahead my next available train." So this was indeed a life-transforming episode in Gandhiji's life.
Did this incident and the acute humiliation that he suffered pave the way for the making of the Mahatma? The director of the National Gandhi Museum in Delhi, Dr. Alagan Annamalai, shares his views.
The making of Mahatma started from that night onwards, because that in itself or humiliation is not for Gandhi. It is because he was an Indian. Therefore, he wanted to resist the injustice for the Indians in South Africa.
Indeed, the world needs to thank those racist people for indulging in this despicable discriminatory act. For this is what paved the way for Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's first non-violent movement in South Africa. Soon after, when news about him reached leaders like Gokhale, they invited Gandhi to take over the reins of the freedom movement in India. It's interesting that when Gandhi decided to set out to discover authentic India, he could well afford to travel by premier compartments, but he had a condition, that he would travel only by third class, just the way most of his fellow Indians from the economically backward sections did.
When Gokhale advised him to tour the whole of India to understand the mind of the people, he has taken the third class compartment. So that was the starting point in India for Gandhi to unite, to meet the people. He has traveled extensively in India from length and breadth of from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, but all with the railways.
Given his immense popularity right from the beginning, Gandhi could easily have had free access wherever he travelled. But the law-abiding citizen that he was, he refused to accept any favours and thus never travelled without a ticket. V. Kalyanam, a freedom fighter and the last personal secretary of Mahatma Gandhi, recounts the time he missed buying tickets for Gandhi and his team.
He always travelled third. He would buy a ticket. Only 3 or 4 of us would go with him. He, his 2 granddaughters and myself and another secretary or somebody. But the entire compartment would be at his disposal. Nobody would get into it. Suddenly when I joined him, he was travelling. The train had gone nearly 100 kilometers. I don't know what made him ask me, have you bought the ticket? I said, no sir, I have joined you only now. I don't know that you buy ticket. I thought you are travelling free in a compartment given to you by British. No, when the station comes, ask this station superintendent to come and see me. So he came to him. Gandhi said, this boy, referring to me, said, this boy has joined me recently. He has not bought the ticket for our journey. So that man replied, sir, you are such a great man. Why should you buy the tickets? Government has given you this compartment. You can travel free. Is this the way you allow all great men to travel free? I'll report to the railway authorities that you are treating people like this. You will lose your job. Then he took the money from me and gave me a receipt. He didn't want to travel without tickets.
A lot of people never cease to wonder why Gandhiji always chose the third class to travel even when he had the means. He came from an affluent family after all. His railway travels across the length and breadth of the country were used unapologetically, as Dr. Arup Chatterjee says, to realize his dream of Swaraj.
It has been created into an urban legend that Gopal Krishna Gokhale asked Gandhiji to tour India. And the impact that this tour to Champaran to Bihar had on Gandhi was very dramatic. He had no qualms about seeking donations aboard them or on platforms for the Satyagraha movement. He used to deliver several lectures and prarthana sessions at railway stations. And in one session, that was held on 21st May 1921, he showed a particular urgency for Swaraj. Now remember, this is during the non-cooperation movement. He says, if the collections do not reach the 1 crore rupee mark before 30th June, we shall be disgraced, and I shall definitely say that we cannot win Swaraj this year. So in 9 days, he is giving a target of fulfilling the 1 crore rupee mark. And this is how he is using the railway stations.
But the plight of the third class and its indescribable filth, where the elementary laws of cleanliness were hardly observed, was something that never ceased to pain Gandhi. Talking about the time he had to travel to Pune for an urgent matter, Dr. Varsha Das reads out an extract from his autobiography that sums up his understanding of the country's problems vis-a-vis train travel and why the people treated them the way they did.
In his autobiography, he writes about the state of affairs in the third class compartment. This is the episode at Bardwan station. He says that as soon as the booking window opened, I went to purchase the tickets. But it was no easy thing to get them. The passengers who were forward continued to push me out. I was therefore about the last of the first crowd to get a ticket. The train arrived, and getting into it was another trial. There was a free exchange of abuse and pushes between passengers already in the train and those trying to get in. We ran up and down the platform, but everywhere met with the same reply: no room here. I went to the guard. He said, you must try to get in where you can or take the next train. He had no time to listen to me. I got into the interclass compartment with my wife. The guard saw us getting in. At Asansol station, he came to charge us excess fares. I said to him, it was your duty to find us room. We could not get any, and so we are sitting here. If you can accommodate us in the third class compartment, we shall be only too glad to go there. I cannot accommodate you. You must pay the excess fare or get out.
In his struggle for freedom, Gandhiji managed to align himself with the common man the way no other leader of the time could do. Dr. A.K. Merchant, a Gandhian, an author and secretary of the Baha'i Foundation of India, has this to share.
When he was a barrister and he was working, he naturally wished to be with the educated gentry, and his English education made him feel that he should not allow white supremacy to dominate him. But when he came to India, he, of course, acquired a new mindset. He looked at the masses and he felt that he needed to travel and see for himself. So he traveled in third class. That was the only way he could align himself. He changed his dress and he managed to win over the masses of people by mingling with them in such a natural way that they felt that he belonged to them. Though he also belonged to the upper caste, but then he had no discrimination. So to further his cause of the independence of India, he felt that he had to adopt means. He had to show in both words and deeds, and also his attitude, that he understood the feelings, the emotions. He felt the pain, the suffering, the oppression of the people of India.
Although Gandhiji came to rely substantially on the railways, he never really developed a fondness for them. The reasons were varied. Gandhiji felt they were the carriers of the bubonic plague. As they allowed people to move freely from one place to another, they helped spread the plague germs. Dr. A.K. Merchant reveals.
With respect to the railways, India's overpopulation factor has always been a matter of concern. When the means of communication become rapid, it would also spread contagious diseases. Because he noticed that in his travels, a lot of the sections of the population lived in very unhygienic conditions. He also complained about the lack of cleanliness. The railway toilets, the closets, food that used to be served at the railway stations. And all this added to the misery and spread of the disease.
For someone who had always travelled in the first class in South Africa, travelling by third class, in which passengers were always packed like sardines, became his favoured choice. While the railways served Gandhi's purpose of taking him to different parts of the country to meet and address people, they also gave hundreds of those along the way the opportunity of having a glimpse of his. For many people, just a sight of their beloved Bapu was enough. The stations would resound with chants of Mahatma Gandhi ki Jai. Dr. Annamalai talks of one such day on the train.
The train was stopped at a railway station and everybody was shouting, Mahatma Gandhi ki Jai, Mahatma Gandhi ki Jai. So it was normal, natural. But there was also a single voice, Kasturba ki Jai, Kasturba ki Jai. It was very surprising for Gandhi. But suddenly Harilal appeared near the window. He shouted that Kasturba ki Jai. And he offered a few oranges to Kasturba. Then Gandhi asked him, you are giving to your mother, you are not giving to me. He said, no, this is for my mother alone.
And then there was the time when his train stopped at a station in Bengal. Gandhiji heard the same chants but wished they were for someone else, as Dr. Annamalai reveals.
When he traveled in Calcutta, and the whole crowd shouted, Mahatma Gandhi ki Jai, Mahatma Gandhi ki Jai. He was so sad that this is a place for Subhash Chandra Bose. And people should say Subhash Chandra Bose ke Jai. Why they are calling me? They should have invoked Subhash Chandra Bose's name.
Gandhiji believed in not wasting a single moment of the day, even when he was on the move. Recalling an incident when they were once on a train, Mr. Kalyanam, his personal secretary, talks about what work meant for Gandhiji.
When we travel, what do? We sit in the compartment or we read some book. If there are other people, we go on talking to each other. Waste our time. But we don't do any serious work. Gandhi used to do serious work in the train. We are sitting in a compartment. We are only 4 of us. He was observing silence. Morning 6 to evening 6. He won't talk. So he could talk to me. I went to him. He gave me a piece of paper on which he had written something. Small piece of paper. It was a letter addressed to the Viceroy, Lord Wavell. When he gives me this, it means I must type it. I didn't know that he does the work also in the train. At 6 o'clock, he broke his silence. Called me, Kalyanam. I went there. Where is that letter? Sir, I don't have a typewriter. I didn't know that you do the work here. He said, when I send for a barber, I expect him to bring his tools. So I understood. I came back. Journalists always traveled with us. They were in the other compartment. They were traveling first class and second class. They won't travel in the third class of Gandhi. The granddaughters told me that journalists also travel. I never knew about it. So granddaughters always traveled with him. So I went to the next compartment. When the train stopped, I borrowed that typewriter and typed that letter and gave it to him. Gandhi was satisfied.
This perhaps is the reason why Dr. Annamalai calls the railways Gandhiji's third ashram. He goes on to talk about the time when Gandhiji had to go to Kumbakonam for a meeting. But no passenger train was available. Not one to take no for an answer. He managed to find a way out. How? Dr. Annamalai will tell us that.
He went to the railway station. He has to take the train to Kumbakonam. But unfortunately, that time, there was no passenger train. Only goods train came at that place. He didn't want to waste the time. So he talked with the railway officials. And the railway officials also agreed to provide some space in the goods train to travel up to Kumbakonam. But interestingly, in 1946, when Gandhi visited Tamil Nadu, the British government provided a special train only for Gandhi to travel across Tamil Nadu.
It's indeed ironic that the same people who once threw out Gandhi from a train were forced to give him a special train. And it makes him the only leader in the world to have travelled in a goods train. Finally, to the question, did the railways help in making Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi the Mahatma, Dr. Arup Chatterjee has an answer.
On the one hand, he was able to look through the kind of division that the British colonial government had sown in Indian society. On the other, he could look through the hierarchies and he could subvert that the Indian Railways had perpetuated in Indian society thanks to first class and European class and Indian class and third class and so on. He could also see through the kind of social divisions of caste, gender, and religion, which could very easily be broken on the Indian railways. So, in addition to the kind of theatricalization of railway platforms, the fact that he could enlist the crowds coming to the railway stations into a nationalist cause rather than simply a secular cause or a colonial cause, and the overarching effect of this earned him the title of Mahatma. Although I have suggested the making of Mohandas into Mahatma always had the railways in the background, but this is something that we have come to associate with Mahatma Gandhi thanks to the kind of nation we are as well, because we believe that it is not the body that carries the soul, but the soul that carries the body. And we have a grand tradition of deification and recognizing human beings as avatars. So if Gandhiji was an avatar of the good and the powerful, then the railways were his vahana.
Throughout his life in India, the railways, as we know, played a major role in Gandhiji's life. In fact, it would not be wrong to say that they were once even instrumental in saving his life.
Several attempts were made on the life of Mahatma Gandhi. One attempt that missed him was the closure of that railway crossing, which saved his life because the timing by the assassins didn't work out since his motorcade was stopped.
This was in Pune, when attackers hurled a bomb at a car they thought he was in. Gandhiji's car escaped because it had been held up at a closed railway crossing. And that turned out to be a blessing in disguise. However, death did find its way towards Gandhiji when he was shot on that fateful morning of 30th of January 1948. His mortal remains were taken for submersion to the confluence of the holy rivers in Allahabad, just the way he would have preferred, by third class. The train was called Asthi Special.
In the national program of features, you just heard a feature titled Gandhi's Track to Swaraj. The feature was scripted and narrated by Purnima Sharma. It was produced by Meenakshi Mund. A presentation of the Central English Features Unit. This broadcast came to you from the Delhi station of All India Radio.